You could have your music flagged as AI without ever touching an AI tool. And that's not hypothetical, it's already happening. Most musicians think AI detection works like a simple filter. If it's AI, it gets flagged. If it's human, you're safe. That assumption is wrong. The reality is a lot more complicated and a lot more uncomfortable because these systems are not actually deciding what your music is, they're estimating what your music looks like. And that difference creates a gray area where real music can get flagged, partially AI-assisted music becomes risky, and perfectly legitimate tracks can get caught in a system that isn't fully mature yet. So this isn't just a tech discussion, this is something that can affect whether your music gets accepted by a distributor, how it's treated by streaming platforms, and ultimately whether it gets monetized at all. Now, I'm not here to scare you, and I'm definitely not here to start an emotional debate about AI. I wouldn't do that. What I want to do is walk through how this actually works from a practical standpoint, so you can understand the risk, and more importantly, how to think about it like a professional. The biggest mistake musicians are making right now is thinking that AI detection is a yes or no system. It's not. There's no switch that flips and says, yep, this track is AI, or this track is human. That's not how these systems work. What they're actually doing is assigning a probability score. In other words, this track has a high likelihood of being AI generated, or this track has characteristics that resemble AI output. Now, that may sound like a small difference, but it's completely changing the situation. Because the moment you move from certainty to probability, you introduce something that every system has: error. Sometimes the error works in your favor, but sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you can end up in a situation where your track gets flagged or reviewed, your release gets delayed, your distributor starts asking questions, or your music is treated differently by the platform's systems, even though you never intended to do anything wrong. And here's the part that most people don't realize. These systems are not just judging your intent, they're analyzing your output. They don't know how you wrote the track, what tools you used, or what processes look like. They only see the final audio file and whatever metadata is attached to it. So, if your music shares characteristics with known AI-generated patterns, whether that's because of your workflow, your tools, or just how clean and consistent your production is, you can start to look suspicious to a system that's designed to protect the platform. And again, this doesn't mean the system is accusing you of anything. It means you're entering a gray area where the system is no longer confident. And in today's environment, lack of confidence is enough to trigger action. So if you step back from the technology for a second, this whole situation becomes a lot easier to understand. This isn't really about AI, it's about scale and about money. So right now, the amount of music being uploaded to streaming platforms has exploded. And a huge percentage of that growth is coming from AI-assisted or fully AI-generated content. Platforms like Spotify and Apple Music are not dealing with a few edge cases, they're dealing with massive volume. And we're not talking just about a few thousand tracks being uploaded. We're talking about on the order of 100,000 new tracks per day hitting platforms like Spotify. And that number matters even more when you understand where it came from. Just a few years ago, the number was closer to 40,000 tracks per day. We thought that was huge. Now it's 100. So in a relatively short period of time, the volume has more than doubled. And a meaningful percentage of that growth is coming from AI-assisted or fully AI-generated content. Companies like Deezer have already said they're seeing tens of thousands of AI tracks being uploaded daily. So from the platform's perspective, this isn't a niche problem. This is a scaling problem, and it's getting bigger fast. Now, on top of that, you've got fraud, fake artists, fake streams, automated listening farms designed to siphon royalties. This has already cost the industry millions. So from the platform perspective, the problem isn't, is this music creative or is this any good? The problem is, can we trust what's being uploaded? And once trust becomes the issue, everything changes, because now the platform has to protect its recommendation system, its payout system, and its relationships with labels, publishers, and rights holders. So that's why companies like Deezer have gone as far as building their own AI detection tools. Not because they're trying to police creativity, but because they're trying to protect the integrity of their platform. And here's the part most musicians don't think about. These systems are not designed to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're designed to reduce risk at scale. Which means if something looks even slightly questionable, whether it's your audio, your metadata, or your upload behavior even, the system is going to lean towards caution. Not fairness or nuance, but caution. And when you combine massive upload volume and financial incentives and automated decision making, you end up with exactly the environment we're in right now. A system that has to move fast and doesn't always get it right. So this is where things get messy, because once you understand that these systems are based on probability, you have to accept something else that comes with that. They make mistakes, and not just theoretical mistakes, real documented false positives. We've already seen this play out in other areas of AI detection. In the writing world, tools that were supposed to identify AI-generated content ended up flagging student essays incorrectly, accusing people of using AI when they didn't, and in some cases, even misidentifying well-known human-written documents. Even OpenAI backed away from its own AI detection tool because it wasn't reliable enough to use in the real world. I think in one case, the US Constitution was flagged as fraudulent AI creation. Tools are not perfect. Now think about what that implies. Text is relatively structured. It's easier to analyze. It's more predictable. Music is the opposite. It's layered. It's expressive. It's far more abstract. So if detection systems struggle with something like writing, there's no reason to believe they're suddenly perfect when it comes to audio. And this is the part that should get your attention. A detection system doesn't need to be wrong very often to create a real problem. Even if a small percentage of tracks gets flagged incorrectly, that's still thousands of songs. And some of those are going to belong to independent composers, working producers, people who are doing everything legitimately. And from their perspective, it doesn't matter that the system is mostly accurate. What matters is they got caught on the wrong side of it. And this is where a lot of musicians get frustrated because they assume the system is evaluating fairness. It is not. It's evaluating risk. And when a system is optimized for risk reduction at scale, it will always accept a certain level of false positives as the cost of doing business. Not because it's malicious, because at scale, precision is less important than control. Now let's talk about what most of you are actually doing, because the reality is you're not sitting there generating full songs with AI and uploading them untouched. You better not be. That's not how most working musicians operate. What you're doing is something much more practical. Generating an idea, building a chord progression, creating a texture or a pad, maybe experimenting with a rhythm or a melodic concept, and then taking that into your DAW and finishing the track yourself. That's a typical hybrid workflow, part human, part AI assisted. Now on the surface that feels completely reasonable, but from a detection standpoint, this is where things get complicated, because these systems are no longer just analyzing the final stereo mix, they're increasingly capable of analyzing components within the track. That means vocals, drums, harmonic content, instrumental layers. These can all be evaluated separately now. So even if your arrangement is yours, your mix is yours, and your performance is yours, one AI-generated element can influence the overall probability score of the entire track. Not definitively, but enough to move it out of the clearly human category and into that gray area where the system isn't confident anymore. And once you're in that gray area, the system doesn't need to prove anything. It just needs to decide, this might be risky. And here's the part that matters for your workflow. The more realistic and integrated your hybrid process becomes, the harder it is for a detection system to confidently classify what it's hearing. Which sounds like a good thing, but it actually creates more uncertainty. Because now you're not clearly human and you're not clearly AI either. You're something in between. And right now, the industry doesn't have a clean way to handle that. There's no universal standard that says this level of AI assistance is acceptable. We're not there yet. There's no consistent rule across platforms. So instead, what you get is inconsistent decisions, inconsistent enforcement, and a system that reacts differently depending on the context, which is exactly the kind of environment where mistakes happen. Here's the part nobody is talking about. You can get flagged without using AI at all. And it comes down to something that, ironically, most producers take pride in. Clean, consistent, technically perfect production. So think about modern workflows. A lot of you are working with MIDI-based compositions, perfectly quantized timing, high-quality virtual instruments, extremely controlled dynamics, clean, noise-free mixes. From a musical standpoint, that's just good production. That's what we all strive for. But from a detection standpoint, that can start to look artificial because human performance, real performance, has inconsistencies, slight timing variations, dynamic fluctuations, imperfections in articulation. Those things are subtle, but they're real. And detection systems are trained to look for patterns. So when a track shows perfectly aligned timing, uniform energy distribution, highly consistent tonal balance, It can register as something that doesn't behave like a traditional recording. Now, I've actually experienced a version of this myself long before AI detection was even part of the process. I had a track rejected by a human screener years ago because they said it sounded too quantized, too MIDI. I'm quoting. The irony was, it was completely live. That was me playing my soprano saxophone and piano. No quantization, no MIDI performance tricks, just years of practicing my instrument and tightening up my timing. So, from their perspective, it sounded artificial. From my perspective, I had spent decades getting better at my craft. And that's the point. Sometimes the signal gets misinterpreted. And now we're taking that same idea and applying it to automated systems, non-human. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean stop producing clean music. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is awareness. Because once you understand how these systems interpret patterns, you realize they're not evaluating your intention or your skill. They're evaluating statistical characteristics of the audio. And sometimes those characteristics overlap between highly polished human production and algorithmically generated content, which brings us back to the same core issue. You're operating in a system that doesn't always understand the difference. So let's take everything we've talked about, false positives, hybrid workflows, and the too perfect problem, and bring it into the real world, because this isn't abstract. These are situations that can actually happen. So scenario one AI element. You build a full track yourself, your arrangement is yours, your mix is yours, your structure is solid, but you use AI for one thing, maybe a pad or a string layer, a background texture. Everything else is human, it's all you. From your perspective, you're just using it as a tool. But from a detection systems perspective, that one element can shift the probability score of the entire track. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to move you into that gray zone of risk. And once you're in that zone, the system doesn't need to be certain, it just needs to be cautious. Scenario 2, fully human, but still flagged. You write everything yourself, no AI, no generators, no shortcuts, but your production is extremely tight, highly consistent, very clean. MIDI is locked in, timing is perfect, everything sits exactly where it should. From a musical standpoint, that's professionalism. From a pattern recognition standpoint, that can start to resemble generated content. So even though the track is 100% human, it can still be interpreted as AI-like. Scenario 3, behavior-based flags. This one has nothing to do with your music at all. It's about how you upload. Let's say you release a large number of tracks in a short period of time. You keep your track lengths very similar, follow a consistent naming pattern, or repeatedly use similar structures. It's just a batch processing job. I do that all the time. To you, that's efficiency. To a platform, that can look like automation. And in many cases, systems will flag behavior before they even analyze the audio. It's so frustrating. Scenario 4, pattern similarity. This is the most subtle and probably the most frustrating. Let's say your style naturally aligns with common chord progressions, modern production aesthetics, widely used sound palettes. All the things we're told to do to be successful in sync. So in other words, you sound like what's already out there. The problem is, AI models are trained on large data sets of existing music. So sometimes your track can overlap with patterns the system associates with generated content. Not because you used AI, but because you're operating in the same stylistic space. So none of these scenarios mean you did anything wrong. They just mean you interacted with a system that's trying to make fast decisions based on incomplete information. So everything we've talked about so far is happening right now. But the bigger question is, where's it going? Because the current situation, the gray areas, the inconsistency, the uncertainty, that's not the end state, that's a transition phase. The first thing to understand is that detection is not going away. It's going to get more sophisticated, more automated, and more deeply integrated into distribution pipelines. Not because the platforms want to control creativity, but because they have no choice. The volume problem isn't shrinking, it's accelerated. The second shift is toward disclosure and transparency. The industry is already working on ways to indicate where AI was used, how it was used, and to what extent. Organizations like DDEX are developing standards for how that information gets attached to your music. And once those standards are in place, it becomes much easier for platforms to sort content, to categorize it, and make decisions about how it's treated. This isn't just a platform issue anymore, it's becoming a regulatory issue. The European Union, the EU, has already moved toward requiring AI-generated content to include machine-readable disclosures, which means over time, we're likely going to see watermarking, standardized tagging, and clearer distinctions between human and AI generated work. Now, that doesn't mean everything becomes perfectly accurate overnight, but it does mean the direction is toward less ambiguity. But here's the key point. We're not there yet. Right now, we're in what I would call the messy middle, where the technology is improving, the rules are not fully defined, and enforcement is inconsistent, which is exactly why you're seeing false positives, gray area decisions, and different behavior across platforms. This is the part of the timeline where things feel unpredictable. When you combine everything we've talked about, the probability-based detection, the hybrid workflows, the scale problem, you end up in a position where the smartest move is not to react emotionally, but to think strategically. So the question becomes, what do you actually do with all of this? Because it's very easy to watch a video like this and walk away thinking, this is a problem I can't control. And that's really not the right takeaway. You don't control the system, but you can control how you operate inside it. So first, I would stop thinking in terms of AI versus human, safe versus unsafe, allowed versus not allowed. That's not how the system works anymore. Everything we talked about is based on probability and pattern recognition. So the better question is, how does my workflow look from the outside? Not what you intended, not what you meant to do, but what the system sees. Second, I would start paying attention to the signals your workflow creates. Things like extremely uniform timing, repeated structural patterns, identical track lengths across releases, heavy reliance on generated elements. None of these are wrong, but they can increase the likelihood that your content gets interpreted a certain way. And awareness alone puts you ahead of most people. Now third, and this is just practical, keep the receipts, keep your project files, your session data, your stems, anything that shows how your track was created. Not because you expect a problem, but because if something does get flagged, you have a way to respond. This is just thinking like a professional. This is where most people go wrong. They either panic and overreact or ignore the whole thing completely. Neither one helps you. The reality is, this is part of the system now. And the people who adapt to systems, whatever they are, tend to do better than the people who pretend they don't exist. At the end of the day, this comes back to a mindset shift. If you're trying to build something in this industry, whether that's sync, production, or anything else, you have to stop thinking purely like an artist. I know it's hard. Start thinking like someone operating inside of a system, because that's what's happening right now. Not just creativity, not just expression, but a system with rules, incentives, and constraints. And once you understand that, you stop reacting and you start making better decisions. AI detection isn't perfect, and that's exactly why you need to understand it. Not so you can avoid it completely, and not so you can get caught up in fear about what might happen, but so you can operate intelligently in a system that's still figuring itself out. Because right now, the gap isn't just between human and AI, it's between people who understand how these systems work and people who don't. And that gap is where opportunities and problems are going to show up first. So if you take anything from this, it should be the following. Don't assume you're safe just because your music is human. It's sad but true. And don't assume you're at risk just because you're using tools. Understand the system, work within it, and make decisions like someone who plans to be here long term. So thanks so much for watching. Now, go make something great.